Paul Rosenblum is a bookkeeper, not an accountant or a CPA. Although the information in this podcast comes from professionals, it's meant to give you enough knowledge about these subjects to have a meaningful dialogue with your tax preparer about bookkeeping and taxes.
There's one subject that keeps coming back over and over again in my monthly life as a bookkeeper. I've talked about this in episodes 5, 6, 21, and 25. That subject? The classification of workers and how to determine if a worker should be classified as a 1099 subcontractor or a W-2 employee. I've spoken about the guidelines and how to try to determine as a business owner how someone should be classified. But did you know that there are actual tests that states use to determine this? I haven't found the specifics on a state's labor website explaining this to business owners, but the tests actually do exist and are used in almost every workers' comp audit. Let's talk about that today. And I think it's important that you listen to this one to the end. This is a shorter episode than usual, but so very important. I'm Paul Rosenblum. There are two tests that are used to determine if a worker should be classified as a W-2 or a subcontractor. As I have mentioned before, it's not up to the worker to determine how they get paid. It's up to the state. In the prior episodes that I have previously mentioned, I talked about the federal guidelines. Guidelines versus a test, and what that means is yet another story. However, the U.S. Department of Labor will work in conjunction with the states, so if the states change the classification of the worker, the states will report that to the IRS for tax reasons, which could mean big tax charges and penalties for the subcontractor or employee as well as the business paying them. The common law test and the ABC test determine if a worker should be classified as an employee or a W-2 or a subcontractor. The common law test, which is used by the IRS in 24 states, including Washington, D.C., but Maine actually uses a combination of both of these tests, examines the nature of the employment relationship, focusing on behavioral control, financial control, and the type of relationship between the employer and the worker. Let's look into that further. Behavioral control. Does the employer control where, when, or how work is completed? If an employer tells the worker that they have to come into their office and cannot work remotely, then that moves toward being classified as a W-2 employee. If there is any kind of schedule given to the worker by the company without negotiating with the worker, then a W-2 classification is warranted. If there are any rules as to how the work is to be performed, or any meetings or training that the worker has to attend by company policy, then a W-2 classification is definitely warranted. Financial control. Does the employer reimburse the worker's expenses, provide tools and supplies, or control the worker's finances? If the worker lays out money to purchase office supplies, for one example, and the company reimburses them for those supplies, which would then become the company's deductible expense, since the worker is leaving the unused portion of those office expenses behind when they leave, then you are looking at a W-2 classification. If the company provides tools, supplies, or controls the worker's finances, then a W-2 is in order. A company controls the worker's finances if the company offers an amount of money that they will pay, maybe with some negotiation for the final figure, but it's controlled by the employer. Type of relationship. How is the work described in a contract? Are there employee-type benefits like pension, insurance, vacation pay, 401k, or profit sharing? If a worker is offered any type of benefit, even a gym membership paid for by the company, then they should be classified as a W-2 employee, not a subcontractor. By the way, if you have any questions about any of this or comments, please reach out to me at bookkeepermensch@gmail.com or go to the website at bookkeepermensch.com and contact me there. The ABC test, used by the Department of Labor and 18 states. Absence of control. The worker is free from the control and direction of the hiring entity in performing the work. In other words, if the worker can perform that function remotely or in the employer's office, their choice, then a subcontractor classification is warranted. If there is no time clock or sign-in sheet, then a subcontractor classification could be used. Business is unusual. The work performed is outside the usual course of the hiring entity's business and or done off-site. More specifically, if the company is in construction and someone is hired, such as a bookkeeper or a website designer, then they would be classified as a subcontracted service, not a part-time employee. Customarily engaged. The worker typically works independently in an established trade, occupation, or business of the same nature as the work performed in this organization. This is a tricky one. If you run an accounting firm, for one example, and you hire an accountant who works their own hours, either from home or from your office, should they be an employee or a subcontractor? They are performing the same work that your firm does, but they are working independently. If, however, your firm has rules that they must follow before a tax return gets filed, then a W-2 status would be the way to go. If you as a business owner are in a field where there is an industry standard that some workers are subcontractors and some workers are employees doing exactly the same thing, then that would be the argument for any state audit if they're using this particular test. It is an industry-wide practice using subcontractors and employees to provide the same service, you would say. Those are the rules of the two tests, but that isn't the end of it. Another thing that any auditor will look at is if the people being paid as subcontractors are actually registered as a business. This would include sole proprietorships, LLCs, if the state recognizes an LLC, and not all states do, and corporations. If someone is an individual being paid as a subcontractor but not registered as a business, then the state auditor will classify that person as an employee, possibly back to when they first started working for that company. It's staggering how many independent contractors don't even know that they have to register with the state, even if you are a DBA, doing business as entity. So employer taxes with interest and penalties could be a large amount of money, depending on the number of years and the number of people involved. It can also bounce to the individuals for IRS audits to make sure they are filing taxes correctly, if at all. By the way, in both tests, the state will by default assume that all subcontractors listed in your books should be classified as W-2 employees until proven that they don't. Some states are more aggressive than others, though. Even if an individual has a contract between themselves and the employer, if the contract does not adhere to the ABC test or the common law test, whichever is used in that particular state, then the contract would be deemed as invalid as to the subcontractor status. If most employers look at these tests literally, I think many company owners or human resource departments would realize that many people who are being paid as subcontractors should actually be W-2 employees, either part-time or full-time. The W-9 forms that people fill out and sign, providing their name, address, tax ID number, and name of the company and the kind of entity they are, LLC or corporation or even sole proprietorship, conveniently does not have a box to check to tell the employer if you have a business certificate or not, even if you are a sole proprietorship. So realistically, how does a company know? Is there a law requiring employers to get a copy of the certificate of business for a sole proprietorship, or the state's paperwork for the LLC, or the paperwork for the S Corp or the C Corp filing? Not that I can find. Is the process just designed to fail? If you call the state and ask their advice, they will read you different guidelines in the tests for you to make your own decision. Then if you make the wrong decision and you get caught, you will pay penalties and interest. Just to give me something more to do, like I really need that, I'm thinking about requiring the individual to provide to me their state business certificate before I pay them as a subcontracted service. If they don't or can't provide that, then they will be paid as an employee. And the owner of the company will be angry at me for costing them more money and maybe losing a subcontracted service that they don't want to put on payroll. As I have said before, your bookkeeper equals a human punching bag. However, I'm Rocky Balboa in Rocky III fighting Clubber Lang for the second time. I'll survive for another day, and another, and another. I'll be bruised for a while, but will bounce back up for another day to write about my experiences for this podcast. I'm going to ice my upper torso now. I'm Paul Rosenblum.